He saw a pregnant black woman dressed with elegance and pride, and instead of seeing a mother, he saw a target. Fueled by hate, a bitter old man launched into a brutal attack in a crowded mall, fists flying as shoppers screamed. But within seconds, agents tackled him to the ground. Because this wasn't just any woman. She was the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country, and as her baby clung to life in her womb, the man who assaulted her lost everything, his freedom, his job, and the only family who ever believed in him. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Not even her. Frank's world spun as his face pressed against the cold mall tiles. The Secret Service agent's grip was iron-tight, professional, leaving no room for resistance. His bad knee screamed in protest, but their hold only tightened when he flinched. "Stop resisting," one agent commanded, though Frank had already gone limp with shock. Through the chaos of running feet and frightened voices, he heard someone calling for medics. His eyes darted sideways, catching glimpses of the scene he'd created. The elegant woman, Dr. Brooks Warren, remained on her knees, both arms wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly. A mall security guard knelt beside her, speaking in low, steady tones, while keeping one hand raised to hold back the growing crowd of onlookers. "Ma'am, paramedics are on their way," the guard assured her. "Try not to move." The holiday music playing overhead felt suddenly grotesque, cheerful bells and lyrics about peace on earth mixing with the aftermath of violence. A child somewhere in the crowd started crying. "Clear the area," another agent ordered, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Everyone back!" Frank felt cold metal close around his wrists as they cuffed him. His chest heaved with ragged breaths as reality crashed in. The Secret Service. Not mall cops, actual federal agents. The woman he'd attacked wasn't just another shopper. "Get him up," directed a female agent with close-cropped dark hair. "Careful. Secure his legs too." They hauled Frank to his feet, efficiently patting him down and securing his ankles with additional restraints. His bad knee wobbled, but they held him upright between them. Through the gap in the crowd, he saw paramedics rushing in with a gurney. Dr. Brooks Warren was breathing in measured counts now, still protecting her belly, but allowing the medics to check her vital signs. Despite everything, her composure remained, a dignity Frank had completely abandoned. "BP is slightly elevated," one paramedic reported. "Any pain or cramping, ma'am?" "Some tightness," she admitted quietly. "But I think we're okay." She rubbed her belly gently. The female agent who'd ordered Frank restrained was now speaking urgently into her wrist mic. "Package secure, medical responding, require immediate transport." More agents materialized from the crowd, forming a protective ring around Dr. Brooks Warren as the medics helped her onto the gurney. The efficiency of their response made it clear this wasn't just a random assault. This was a security breach involving someone important. Frank's stomach lurched as they began moving him toward a service corridor, away from the public area. His whole body trembled now, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. What had he done? Who exactly had he attacked? "Watch your head," one agent warned mechanically as they guided him into a waiting vehicle. The last thing Frank saw before the door closed was the holiday lights reflecting off the mall's polished floors, the same lights that had seemed to mock his poverty just minutes ago. Now they illuminated the ruins of whatever life he had left. Through the vehicle's tinted windows, he watched more black SUVs arrive, their lights flashing silently. The crowd had grown larger despite security's efforts to disperse them. Phones were out, recording everything. His face would be everywhere within hours. His chest tightened as another horrible thought struck him. Maddie. What would happen to Maddie when they saw the videos, when they knew what her grandfather had done? "I need my phone call," he croaked. "My granddaughter. She's waiting at after-school care. Someone needs to—" "You'll be processed first," the agent beside him cut in flatly. "All communications go through proper channels." Frank slumped in his seat, the restraints biting into his wrists. The proud, angry man who'd walked into the mall was gone. In his place sat someone smaller, older and terrified, watching his entire world crumble in the space of 5 brutal minutes. The SUV pulled away from the mall, leaving behind the cheerful holiday displays and the scene of his unforgivable crime. Frank closed his eyes, but he couldn't shut out the image of Dr. Brooks Warren falling, protecting her unborn child from his rage. He couldn't unsee the truth of what he'd become. The mall erupted into chaos. Security guards rushed to clear a path as shoppers pressed against store windows, phones raised high to capture the scene. Frank lay face down on the cold tile floor, his chest heaving as Secret Service agents secured his hands behind his back with metal cuffs that bit into his wrists. "Stay down," one agent ordered, his knee pressed firmly against Frank's back. Through the forest of legs surrounding him, Frank could see Alana on her knees, both arms wrapped protectively around her belly. Two paramedics in dark blue uniforms knelt beside her, speaking in low, urgent voices as they helped ease her onto a stretcher. "My baby," Alana whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, my baby." A young paramedic with gentle eyes squeezed her hand. "We're going to take good care of both of you, ma'am." The ambulance ride was a blur of motion and sound. Alana gripped the paramedic's hand as they wove through traffic, sirens wailing. Each bump in the road made her wince. Christmas decorations flashed past the windows, wreaths and twinkling lights that now seemed to mock the fear coursing through her. At the hospital, the emergency entrance burst into activity as a tall man in a dark suit strode through the sliding doors, flanked by more agents. Daniel Warren's face was a mask of controlled panic as he rushed to his wife's side. "I'm here, love," he murmured, taking her hand. "I'm right here." Frank sat handcuffed to a chair in a small holding room, two agents standing guard. Through the thin walls, he could hear snippets of conversation from passing hospital staff. The vice president's wife, federal protection detail, hate crime against Mrs. Warren. The reality of what he'd done crashed over him like ice water. Not just any pregnant woman, the second lady of the United States. His stomach churned. Hours crawled by. A doctor with silver-streaked hair finally emerged from the examination room, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Warren has significant bruising and we'll monitor for any complications, but both she and the baby are stable. The fetal heartbeat is strong and regular." Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief as he pulled out his phone to share the news with family. But that momentary peace shattered as notifications began flooding in. The video was everywhere. Social media, news sites, streaming endlessly on every channel. Frank's phone buzzed in the evidence bag, a terse voicemail from his supervisor at the warehouse. "In light of today's events, your employment is terminated, effective immediately." By nightfall, reporters clustered outside his small apartment complex like moths drawn to a flame. Camera lights pierced the darkness as they filmed their segments, using words like shocking assault and hate-filled attack. The next morning in court, Frank's public defender stood beside him as the judge reviewed the charges. Felony assault with a hate crime enhancement. The prosecutor argued forcefully against bail, citing the violent nature of the crime and Frank's military training. "Your Honor, Mr. Mallory poses a clear danger to the community. The victim was targeted based on race while heavily pregnant and under federal protection. We request he be held without bond." The judge nodded gravely. Bail denied. The defendant will remain in custody. As officers led Frank back toward the holding cell, a social worker in a navy blazer approached with a clipboard and sympathetic eyes. "Mr. Mallory, I'm with Child Protective Services. Given the serious nature of these charges and concerns for her safety, we're removing your granddaughter Maddie into emergency foster care." Frank's knees nearly buckled. "No, please. She's all I have." "You'll be notified of all proceedings regarding her placement," the social worker said quietly. The final blow came when Alana Brooks Warren herself addressed the court, her arm in a sling, dark bruises visible beneath her collar. But instead of demanding maximum punishment, she spoke with steady conviction. "I'm requesting a restorative justice assessment for Mr. Mallory through Veterans Treatment Court," she said. "But only if he's willing to take full responsibility for his actions without excuses or deflection. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability and the possibility of change." Frank slumped in his chair as the full weight of consequences crashed down. Prison wasn't even the worst of it. He'd lost his job, his freedom, his reputation, but losing Maddie cut deeper than all of it. The one innocent person who still believed in him was being taken away for her own protection. From him. Agent Ruiz, who had tackled him at the mall, watched Frank's face crumple as he absorbed this final loss. The older man seemed to shrink, shoulders curving inward as if trying to make himself disappear. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the county jail intake room, casting harsh shadows. Across the metal table where Frank sat, His wrists throbbed where the handcuffs had been, leaving angry red marks that he couldn't stop staring at. The public defender, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with reading glasses hanging from a chain, spread papers in neat rows across the scratched surface. "Mr. Mallory," she said, her voice matter-of-fact but not unkind, "here's what happens next. The court has already issued an emergency, protective order. That means absolutely no contact with Dr. Brookswarren or her family, not even through someone else." Frank shifted in the hard plastic chair. "But I need to explain." "No," she held up one hand. "The detention hearing is in 48 hours. Right now, the Veterans Treatment Court might screen you, but only if you agree to their terms. That means treatment. That means taking full responsibility." "Treatment?" Frank's voice cracked. "I can't afford Mr. Mallory." The defender leaned forward, her tired eyes suddenly sharp. "The cameras caught everything, every second. Your only chance, your only path forward, is the truth." Across town, in a private hospital room with security posted outside, Alana lay still against white pillows. The monitors beeped steadily, tracking both her heartbeat and the baby's. Her mother, Evelyn, sat in the chair beside her, grey-streaked, hair neat despite the long hours, reading quietly from a small Bible worn smooth with use. When Alana's phone buzzed again on the side table, Evelyn reached over and turned it off completely. "You don't need that noise right now, baby," she said softly. Alana nodded, one hand resting protective over her stomach. "How many reporters are still outside? Don't you worry about that." Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. "The Lord knows what happened. That's enough for tonight." Down the hall, Daniel paced in a conference room, his usual composed demeanor strained as he met with Agent Ruiz and the hospital's social worker. His tie was loosened, suit jacket draped over a chair. "I want maximum protection," he said. "Not just now, through the rest of her pregnancy, through—" "Sir," Agent Ruiz interrupted carefully, "we've already increased the detail. Dr. Brookswarren will have round-the-clock coverage." The social worker, a woman with kind eyes and graying curls, added, "We can also connect her with trauma counseling when she's ready." Daniel stopped pacing, bracing his hands on the back of a chair. She shouldn't need any of this. She was buying baby blankets. His knuckles went white against the chair. She was buying blankets. Back in the jail, Frank stared at the consent forms for the psychological evaluation. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The defender had stepped out to take a call, and now she returned with news that made his stomach drop. "Child Services has confirmed placement," she said quietly. "Maddie's with an emergency foster family. Licensed couple. Good record with the system." Frank's throat closed up. He could see Maddie's face so clearly, her confused eyes, her small shoulders in that purple backpack she loved. Would she have her stuffed penguin? Did anyone know she needed her nightlight? "She's just a kid," he whispered. "She didn't do anything wrong." "No, she didn't." The defender's voice was firm. "Which is why you need to think very carefully about your next steps. These evaluation forms are your first chance to show the court you understand the gravity of what happened." Frank picked up the pen. It felt heavy as lead. He thought of Maddie in some strange bedroom, scared and alone, because of what he'd done. Because he'd let anger drive him into something he couldn't take back. His signature was barely legible as he signed each page, but he signed them all. When evening lockdown came, Frank lay on the thin jail mattress, staring up at the shadowed ceiling. The cell was quiet except for distant footsteps and the hum of the ventilation system. He whispered Maddie's name into the darkness, like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of truth he'd have to face to ever see her again. "I'm sorry," he added, so soft even he could barely hear it. But in the stark silence of the cell, those two words felt like the first real thing he'd said all day. Morning sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains as Maddie blinked awake. The foster home's kitchen smells drifted upstairs, warm pancakes and coffee, so different from Grandpa's instant oatmeal and weak tea. Hiragus's stomach growled, but she stayed curled under the blanket, clutching the stuffed penguin she'd grabbed when the nice lady from Child Services helped her pack yesterday. Mrs. Chen, the foster mum, had given Maddie clean pajamas and a quiet room with blue walls. She was kind, but everything felt wrong. No creak of Grandpa's bad knee in the hallway, no morning cartoons, no up-and-atom kiddo through her door. At 9 o'clock, Ms. Rodriguez, the caseworker, arrived with her bright red bag and gentle smile. They sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Chen worked quietly at the sink. "Maddie," Ms. Rodriguez began, spreading out some papers and markers, "I know you have lots of questions about your grandpa." Maddie picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Is he in jail forever?" "The judge hasn't decided yet. Right now, your grandpa made a dangerous choice at the mall. He hurt someone. And that's very serious. He has to talk to the judge about what happened." "But," Maddie's lower lip trembled, "is he bad forever now?" Ms. Rodriguez touched her hand softly. "People can do bad things without being bad forever. What matters is if they're truly sorry and work hard to change." She slid some paper closer. "Would you like to write him a letter? You can tell him how you feel." Maddie nodded, picking up a marker with shaking fingers. The E words came slowly, tears splashing onto the page. "Dear Grandpa, why did you hurt that lady? I saw it on TV before Mrs. Chen turned it off. I'm scared, I don't understand. The other kids at school might know now. I still love you. Love, Maddie." She folded it carefully, drew a wobbly heart on the front. Across town, Frank sat in the jail's fluorescent-lit day room when the letter arrived. His hands shook as he opened it. The childish handwriting, the tear stains, the simple questions he couldn't answer. It all hit him like a physical blow. His chest tightened. The tough guy mask he'd worn since yesterday cracked. Hot tears spilled down his weathered cheeks as the truth he'd been fighting finally broke through. "Oh, God," he whispered, pressing the letter to his face. "What did I do?" A younger inmate glanced over, but Frank didn't care anymore about looking weak. The words tumbled out in a rough whisper. "I didn't defend anything. I attacked her, a pregnant woman just shopping, because I decided she didn't deserve to be there. Because I'm—" He couldn't finish. Meanwhile, at their heavily guarded home, Alana eased onto the couch as Daniel arranged pillows behind her. The hospital discharge papers listed her injuries clinically: contusions, mild shoulder strain, emotional trauma. But they couldn't capture how she flinched at every sudden movement, how her hands kept drifting protectively to her belly. "I keep seeing his face," she whispered, finally breaking down in Daniel's arms, the hatred in his eyes, like I wasn't even human to him. Her mother Evelyn sat beside her, taking her trembling hands. "The fear is real, baby. What happened was real, but don't let it make your heart smaller. That's what hate wants." "I'm trying, Mama." Alana wiped her eyes. "I meant what I said in court. If he's willing to face what he did, really face it, maybe something good can still come from this." By late afternoon, Frank had made his decision. When his public defender visited, he spoke without his usual defensiveness. "I'll do it," he said. "The veterans program, the restorative justice meetings, whatever they want. No more excuses." The defender nodded, making notes. "The evaluation coordinator can see you tomorrow morning. It won't be easy, Mr. Mallory." "I know." Frank touched the letter in his pocket. "But I owe it to my granddaughter to try and to—" He swallowed hard. "To Dr. Brooks Warren. I need to face what I am, so maybe I can change it." The coordinator booked his evaluation for 9 a.m. As dusk fell outside the high windows, Frank sat on his bunk, carefully refolding Maddie's letter. He tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart, like a promise he couldn't break again. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty cell. "I'm so sorry." The courthouse clinic waiting room smelled of coffee and disinfectant as Frank sat hunched on a plastic chair before sunrise. His orange jumpsuit felt stiff, and the chain between his ankle cuffs clinked whenever he shifted. 2 deputies stood nearby, their faces tired but watchful. A middle-aged therapist with silver-framed glasses called him into a small office. The walls were bare except for his licenses and a clock that ticked too loud. "Mr. Mallory," the therapist said, opening a thick file, "tell me about your service." Frank's knee bounced. "Gulf War era. 23 years ago now. And after?" "Factory work. Till they shut down last spring." Frank's jaw tightened. 30 years, then nothing." The therapist wrote quietly. "How are you managing the debt?" "I'm not." Frank's laugh came out harsh. "Credit cards maxed. Behind on rent. Can't even buy Maddie new shoes when she needs them." "And the anger?" Frank looked away. "What about it?" Without a word, the therapist turned his computer monitor around. The mall video played silently. Frank's rage, Alana falling, agents swarming. Frank's hands curled into fists. "What do you see?" the therapist asked softly. Frank wanted to look away but forced himself to watch. His throat felt like sandpaper. I see, he swallowed hard. I see myself attacking a pregnant woman. Because I was jealous. Because I decided someone like her shouldn't have nice things. Someone like her? A black woman. The words tasted bitter. I saw her jewelry, her clothes. Made up a whole story about how she must have stolen it all because... His voice cracked. Because I couldn't stand that she had what I couldn't give Maddie. The therapist nodded. How's your sleep? Bad. Real bad. Frank rubbed his face. Nightmares from the war. Plus new ones now. Can't rest without drinking first. How much do you drink? Too much. Frank stared at his hands. Started after the factory closed. Gets worse when the bills come. Across town at the women's hospital, Alana lay back on an exam table. The ultrasound wand glided over her belly while Daniel held her hand. Evelyn stood near the window, humming an old hymn under her breath. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, strong and fast. Alana's eyes welled up. Still healthy, the doctor said warmly. But I need to be clear. Stress can trigger premature labor. You need rest and calm. Alana squeezed Daniel's hand. I want to speak at tomorrow's hearing. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't have to. I know. Alana touched her belly. But I need to. Back at the courthouse by afternoon, the judge reviewed the therapist's report. Her eyes were sharp above reading glasses. Mr. Mallory, I'm accepting you into Veterans Treatment Court with conditions. She looked at Frank directly. GPS monitor, daily check-ins, no contact with media, required counseling and anger management, and you will participate in restorative justice conferences when scheduled. Frank nodded, his throat tight. This is not freedom without responsibility, she continued. This is your one chance to earn back trust. Violate these terms and you'll serve your full sentence, understood? Yes, Your Honor. That evening, a van with barred windows drove Frank to a brick building on the edge of town, a veterans' transitional home. A supervisor showed him to a sparse room with a narrow bed and metal locker. Frank sat on the thin mattress after the door locked. The ankle monitor felt heavy. Through the window, he watched the sun set behind bare trees. Tomorrow he would face Alana, not as a target of his hatred, but as a human being he had hurt. His hands trembled as he touched the folded letter in his pocket. Maddie's words burning into his heart. The room grew dark. For the first time in years, Frank didn't want a drink to numb the truth. He needed to feel it all. The shame, the fear, the desperate hope that somehow he could become someone his granddaughter could trust again. The veterans' transitional home greeted Frank with fluorescent lights and the smell of old coffee at 6 a.m. sharp. His eyes opened to a view of chipped ceiling paint and the top bunk's metal frame. The ankle monitor's little green light blinked steadily, a constant reminder of his new reality. Rolling carefully onto his side, his bad knee protesting, Frank took in his surroundings. The small room held 4 bunks, though only 2 were occupied. A piece of paper taped to the wall listed the day's schedule in neat typed rows. "Rise and shine, gentlemen," a counselor's voice carried through the hallway. "Breakfast at 06:30. Frank sat up slowly, wincing. The thin mattress had done his joints no favors. The counselor, a broad-shouldered man named Martinez, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Mallory, after breakfast we'll go over your requirements." Martinez's tone was firm but not unkind. "Better get moving." The cafeteria buzzed with quiet conversation and the clinking of plastic utensils. Frank picked at rubbery eggs and toast, his stomach too knotted to eat much. When he finished, Martinez led him to a small office lined with filing cabinets. "Let's be clear about the rules," Martinez said, settling behind his desk. He pulled out a thick folder. "You're here on strict conditions. Curfew. Is 9 p.m. sharp. No exceptions. You'll attend daily group therapy at 10 a.m. and individual sessions 3 times a week." Frank nodded, his throat tight. "Work assignments start next week. Until then, you're on house detail. The ankle monitor has a 100-yard radius around this building unless you have approved appointments." Martinez leaned forward. "One violation, just one, and you're back in county lockup. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir," Frankie managed. The morning crawled by. Frank made his bed to military corners, attended a group session where he barely spoke, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed him. Everyone knew who he was. The mall video had been everywhere. At 1 o'clock, a transport van arrived to take him to the courthouse. Frank's hands wouldn't stop shaking. This was the meeting he'd been dreading, facing the woman he'd attacked. The conference room felt too bright, too sterile. A mediator, a grey-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, directed Frank to one side of a long table. Secret Service agents positioned themselves discreetly by the doors. Vice President Warren stood near the window, his face carefully neutral. Frank caught a glimpse of the rage contained behind that political mask and quickly looked away. When Dr. Alana Brooks Warren entered, Frank's chest tightened. She wore a simple cream sweater and dark maternity jeans. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish smudges. Her chin was high, shoulders back, one hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Brooks Warren," the mediator said softly. "Are you comfortable proceeding?" Alana nodded and took her seat. The mediator explained the process. Alana would speak first, then Frank could respond, but only to take responsibility, not make excuses. "Mr. Mallory," Alana began, her voice steady, "I want to tell you what happened that day from my perspective." Frank forced himself to meet her eyes. "I was shopping for my baby, something so simple, so joyful. Then I felt your hatred before you even spoke. I tried to stay calm, to walk away. When you grabbed me," her composure wavered slightly, "I felt myself falling. All I could think was, please don't let my baby die." Tears slid down her cheeks, but her voice remained strong. "I laid there on that cold floor hurting, terrified, while people screamed and filmed. In that moment, you didn't see a doctor, a wife, a mother. You didn't see a human being at all." Frank started to speak. "I was angry about money, about being invisible." The mediator held up her hand. "Mr. Mallory, those are excuses. Please focus on taking responsibility." Alana leaned forward slightly. "I have one question for you. Who taught you I wasn't human?" The words hit Frank like a physical blow. His rehearsed defenses crumbled. "Nobody taught me," he whispered. "I chose it. I was jealous and ashamed, and hate felt easier. I decided you didn't deserve what you had. I decided you weren't—" His voice broke. "I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. For what I did. For who I let myself become." Alana was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you're sorry, but words aren't enough. These are my terms. You'll do community service at my maternal health charity. You'll attend anti-bias counseling. You'll pay restitution when you're able. And you'll have no contact with me unless it's approved through proper channels." "Yes, ma'am," Frank said hoarsely. "Whatever you say." The mediator made notes. "Your first shift at the charity starts tomorrow morning at 9. A supervisor will meet you there." She began gathering her papers. "This meeting is concluded." Frank stood on shaky legs. As he walked to the door, he knew with bone-deep certainty that every step forward from this moment would have to be earned through actions, not words. The fluorescent lights of the transitional home buzzed overhead as Frank slumped into a metal chair in the common room. His knee ached from the day's tensions, and the weight of the court, papers in his jacket pocket, felt like stones. Around him, other veterans ate quietly or watched an old sitcom on the wall-mounted TV, careful not to meet his eyes. The meatloaf on his tray grew cold as he pulled out a sheet of lined paper. Writing to Maddie had never been so hard. His weathered hands trembled as he gripped the pen, and the first 2 attempts ended up crumpled beside his tray. "Dear Maddie," he finally wrote, then paused. The Saiji's caseworker's rules echoed in his head. No excuses, no promises he couldn't keep, just truth. "I did something very wrong. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. She's going to have a baby, and I could have hurt that baby too. I'm not asking you to say it's okay, because it's not okay. What I did came from an ugly place inside me that I need to fix. I'm going to work hard every day to become someone better, someone you won't have to be ashamed of." He stopped, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "You stay safe where you are. Listen to your foster family and do well in school. I love you more than anything." The night passed slowly in his narrow bunk, springs creaking with every turn. At 5:30, he was already dressed and waiting when the volunteer driver pulled up in an old Subaru. They rode in silence through streets still dark with winter morning. The charity occupied a converted townhouse, its brick facade brightened by window boxes and a hand-painted sign. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and baby powder. Soft music played, some gentle tune about stars and dreams. Young mothers moved through the rooms, some with infants in carriers. Others with rounded bellies like Alana's had been that day at the mall. Mr. Mallory, the program director, was a firm-voiced woman with grey braids. "Your work area is through here." She handed him work gloves, her expression professional but cool. "We have broken items that need repair, donations to sort, and shelves that need assembly." The storage room was cramped and cluttered. Dented cribs leaned against walls, their parts tangled. Boxes overflowed with onesies and tiny socks. A wooden rocking chair sat with one runner splintered. Frank pulled on the gloves and started with the cribs, methodically checking each joint and screw. He felt eyes on him whenever someone passed the door, quick, wary glances that burned his neck. He deserved them all. Around 10, he stood to stretch his stiff back and noticed the photos. They covered one wall, hundreds of smiling babies, thank you notes from mothers, ultrasound images marked with hopeful dates. His throat tightened as one thought hit him like a hammer. Alana's baby could have been lost, not celebrated. Her photo might have been a memorial instead of a joy. The sound of voices made him turn. Alana stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 agents in plain clothes. She wore a loose sweater that couldn't quite hide her growing belly. Without acknowledging Frank, she spoke quietly to the director about supply levels and upcoming appointments. Frank's hands shook as he picked up his hammer again. He focused on the careful rhythm. Check, measure, tap, secure. Each blow felt like penance. Each fixed rail and tightened bolt was one tiny step toward something better. When the winter sun had faded, the volunteer driver returned. Frank's back ached, his hands were blistered under the gloves, and his soul felt raw. But as they pulled away from the curb, he knew this exhaustion was different from his old factory shifts. This wasn't just work. It was the beginning of whatever redemption might be possible. Back at the transitional home, he washed up for his first group therapy session, the day's dust mixing with water in the sink. He had no illusions about easy forgiveness, but for the first time since the mall, he felt something like hope. Not for himself, but for the chance to prove to Maddie that people could change if they were brave enough to face their own darkness. The harsh electronic buzz of the transitional home's morning alarm jolted Frank awake. His joints creaked as he sat up on the narrow bunk, the ankle monitor's steady green light blinking in the dim room. 6:30 a.m. Time for another day of earning back what he'd thrown away. The community room smelled of burnt coffee and cleaning supplies. 8 other veterans sat in a circle of metal folding chairs, their faces tired but alert. The counselor, Dr. Chen, adjusted her glasses and looked at Frank. "Would you like to share today, Mr. Mallory?" Frank's throat felt dry. He'd spent 3 days mostly silent in these sessions, but today the words came. "I keep thinking about who I was before," he said, his voice rough. 20 years at the factory, raising Maddie. Thought I was doing okay. Then one day at the mall he swallowed hard. "I became someone I don't recognize." Nods around the circle. No judgment, just quiet understanding. The charity's loading dock was already busy when Frank arrived. A large delivery truck waited, packed with donated furniture and supplies. The director pointed him toward a tall black man in his 50s, wearing work gloves and a faded Desert Storm veteran's cap. "Marcus will show you the ropes today," she said. Frank tensed, waiting for the cold shoulder he probably deserved, but Marcus just handed him a pair of gloves. "You're here," Marcus said simply. "That's a start." They worked, in companionable silence, lifting boxes and old furniture. Around mid-morning, Marcus paused to wipe his forehead. "Served 3 tours," he said, adjusting his cap. "Still had folks eye me sideways in uniform, like I hadn't earned the right to wear it." The words hit Frank like a physical blow. Here was a man who'd faced real prejudice, real pain, and instead of letting it poison him, he was spending his retirement helping others. "I'm sorry," Frank said quietly, "for what I did, what I became." Marcus shrugged. "Can't change yesterday. But today? Today you can choose different." Across town, Alana stood in her doorway, one hand pressed against her rounded belly. Daniel had meetings, but Agent Ruiz waited patiently as she gathered her courage for a short walk. "Just to the end of the block," she told herself. That's all. The winter air felt crisp on her face. She made it halfway down the sidewalk when a car backfired with a sharp crack. Alana froze, her heart racing, as memories of the mall flooded back. Agent Ruiz stepped closer, alert. but calm. "We can head back, Dr. Brooks-Warren." "No." Alana took a deep breath. "Just give me a minute." When she returned home, her mother was waiting with tea and understanding eyes. "I only made it halfway today," Alana admitted. "Small courage still counts," Evelyn said firmly. "Every step matters." Back at the charity, Frank's muscles ached as he tightened the last screw on a wooden crib. He'd spent hours making it stable, replacing broken parts, checking every joint. The young mother who came to collect it burst into tears when she saw it. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her hand along the smooth rail. "My baby will have somewhere safe to sleep." Frank had to look away, his own eyes stinging. That evening, he sat on his bunk and stared at the phone for a long time before dialing the caseworker's number. His hand shook slightly. "I'd like to request a supervised visit with Maddie," he said. If she wants to." The caseworker's voice was professional but kind. "She's been asking about you. We can arrange something for tomorrow afternoon." Frank hardly slept that night. He paced his small room, rehearsing what to say, how to explain things to a 10-year-old when he was still struggling to understand himself. The ankle monitor blinked steadily in the darkness, a reminder of consequences and second chances. Tomorrow, he would see his granddaughter. The thought filled him with equal parts hope and terror. He had to show her he could change, not with words, but with actions. Every small choice, every hard truth faced, was another step toward becoming someone Maddie could trust again. Marcus's words echoed in his mind. "Today you can choose different." Frank finally sat on his bunk, exhausted but determined. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now he had direction. He had purpose. Most importantly, he had a chance to prove change was possible, not just to others, but to himself. Frank's hands still smelled of wood varnish as he sat in the counselor's office, afternoon light filtering through dusty blinds. The room was small but welcoming, with a worn armchair and motivational posters that didn't feel quite as hollow as they had a week ago. "Anger is like a wave," the counselor explained, drawing a simple curve on her notepad. "It builds, peaks, then falls. But we can interrupt that build-up if we catch it early enough." She handed Frank a blank index card. "Let's identify your triggers first." Frank gripped his pen tight, then consciously loosened his hold. "Envy," he admitted. "Seeing people with nice things, when I can barely keep the heat on." The counselor nodded. "What else?" "Feeling small, humiliated." The words came harder now. "And fear, not the kind from service. The kind where you're afraid you've already lost everything worth having." They wrote each trigger on the card. Beneath them, the counselor added 3 simple steps. "Keep this with you," she said. "When you feel those triggers, pull it out. Make it automatic, like checking your watch." Frank folded the card carefully, tucking it into his wallet next to his veteran's ID. Its presence felt like a lifeline. The child services building smelled of disinfectant and crayons. Frank sat in a visitation room, trying not to fidget with his ankle monitor. They'd given him a choice of activities, board games, coloring books, a battered deck of cards. He left them, untouched, afraid of seeming too casual about this moment. When Maddie appeared in the doorway, his heart clenched. She wore an unfamiliar sweater that hung past her wrists, probably borrowed from the foster family. Her hair was neatly braided, but her eyes held a wariness that had never been there before. "Hi, sweetie," Frank said softly. He started to rise, arms opening. "Can I have a hug?" Maddie wrapped her arms around herself. "Not yet," she whispered. The words hurt, but Frank made himself nod. "That's okay. Whatever you need." He gestured to the chairs. "Want to sit?" She perched on the edge of her seat, feet barely touching the floor. The caseworker sat quietly in the corner, taking notes. Frank took a deep breath, remembering the index card in his wallet. No excuses, no hiding. "I need to tell you something important," he began. "About what happened at the mall." He kept his voice steady, gentle. "I attacked a pregnant woman. I hurt her because I believed something ugly and wrong, that she didn't deserve nice things because of how she looked. That was my choice, and it was wrong." Maddie's fingers twisted in the 2 long sleeves. "Was she okay, the baby?" "Yes, thank God. And now I'm working at her charity fixing baby things for mothers who need help." He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo of the crib he'd restored that morning. "See, when I finish one, it goes to a family who really needs it." Maddie studied the picture. The crib gleamed with fresh paint, its rails solid and true. "It's pretty," she said quietly. "Are you really changing?" The question came suddenly, her voice small but direct. Frank met her eyes. "I'm trying every day. Going to counseling, learning better ways to handle anger, working to fix what I can." He paused. "I can't undo what I did, but I can choose to be different going forward." That evening, Frank sat in the circle at group counseling, his hands clasped tight. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he described the visit. "She wouldn't hug me," he said roughly. "Can't blame her, but she listened, and at the end, she asked if she could come back next week." His voice cracked. "I'm terrified of failing her again, of being the reason she loses her childhood." The other veterans nodded. They knew about fear, about shame, about the long road back to wholeness. In his room that night, Frank knelt beside his narrow bed. He took out the index card and laid it next to Maddie's letter on the small table. The contrast struck him, her innocent handwriting next to the stark list of his triggers and tools. For the first time in years, he bowed his head to pray. Not for an easier path, he didn't deserve that. Not for forgiveness, that had to be earned. Instead, he prayed for something harder, the strength to face himself honestly and the wisdom to build a better heart. The ankle monitor blinked steadily in the darkness. Outside his window, holiday lights still twinkled on nearby buildings. Frank remained on his knees, letting the tears come quietly, knowing tomorrow would bring another chance to choose differently. The morning light filtered through frosted windows as Frank arrived at the charity storefront. Holiday music played softly from a small radio near the front desk. Inside, staff members bustled about, transforming the usual workspace into something festive. Paper snowflakes waited in neat piles, and a collection of new diaper bags sat arranged on a folding table. "We need these hung up," said Marcus, handing Frank a roll of masking tape. "Baby shower for some of our mums today." Frank nodded, taking the tape without a word. His fingers, stiff from the cold, worked methodically to secure each delicate paper snowflake. The repetitive motion felt good. Simple, useful work that required focus, but not force. More volunteers arrived, carrying platters of cookies and fruit. Frank shifted to setting up metal folding chairs in neat rows, testing each one to make sure it was stable. His knee ached, but he kept going. Around 10 o'clock, a young man shuffled in, hunched against the December wind. His thin grey hoodie offered little protection, and his arms were wrapped tightly around himself. Frank recognized the look in his eyes, that mixture of pride and desperation that came from needing help but hating to ask for it. Without hesitation, Frank shrugged off his heavy work jacket, the good one he'd owned for years, and walked over. "Here," he said quietly, holding it out. The young father started to shake his head. "I can't—" "Please," Frank said. "It's going spare anyway." He set the jacket in the man's hands and turned away before he could protest further, busying himself with organizing gift bags. The room filled gradually with expectant mothers, some with toddlers in tow. Frank stayed in the background, making sure there were enough chairs, refilling the cookie plate, picking up dropped napkins. His plain sweatshirt was thin against the draft from the door, but he barely noticed. When Alana entered, flanked by her usual security detail, the room hushed briefly before breaking into warm applause. She wore a simple maternity dress, her baby bump more pronounced now. There were still faint shadows under her eyes, but she moved with grace to the front of the room. "Welcome, everyone," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "Today isn't about fancy gifts or big statements. It's about recognizing that every mother deserves dignity. Every baby deserves a safe start." She paused, one hand resting on her belly. "This room is full of strength, not the kind that breaks things, but the kind that builds them." Frank kept his head down, sorting diapers by size, but every word reached him. He thought about the crib he'd repaired yesterday, how solid it felt when he finished, how different it was to fix something instead of destroying it. Later that evening, back in his sparse room at the transitional home, Frank sat at the small desk with a sheet of paper. His pen moved slowly but steadily. "Dear Maddie, today I helped with a baby shower at the charity. Set up chairs, hung decorations. Met a young dad who reminded me of your mom when times were tough. The family's there. They're just trying their best, like we always did. Fixed another crib too, made sure all the screws were tight, tested it 3 times. It'll keep a baby safe now. Love, Grandpa. He sealed the envelope without making promises he might not keep. The next morning dawned grey and cold. Frank stood in Veterans Treatment Court, hands clasped behind his back as the judge reviewed his file. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Mr. Mallory," the judge said, looking up from her papers, "I have your progress reports here. Perfect attendance at counseling, consistent service hours, no violations of your monitoring conditions." She adjusted her glasses. "Your supervisors note that you're quiet but reliable. You do what's asked without complaint." Frank nodded, his throat tight. "If you maintain this level of compliance for 2 more weeks," she continued, "we'll implement phase 2 of your case plan. That includes expanded visitation with your granddaughter and the beginning of a family reunification assessment." Frank's eyes burned. He blinked hard, managing another nod. "Do you understand what's required of you?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said, voice rough but clear. "I understand." Outside the courthouse, Frank stood for a moment in the weak winter sunlight. His updated schedule was folded carefully in his pocket. Therapy at 2, group session at 4, charity shift tomorrow at 8. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. He started walking. The afternoon sun was fading when Frank trudged back from his shift at the charity. His knee ached from standing all day, but the good kind of tired had settled into his bones, the kind that came from honest work. As he neared the transitional home's entrance, a woman with a microphone stepped out from behind a parked car. "Mr. Mallory, do you regret what happened at the mall? Are you being forced to work for—" Frank kept his eyes down and his mouth shut, just like they'd taught him. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed through the glass doors, letting them swing closed on the reporter's shouted questions. Inside, his hands shook as he signed the check-in sheet. "You handled that well," said the desk supervisor. "Remember your breathing." In his small room, Frank found an envelope that had been slipped under his door. No return address, just his name in thick black marker. Inside was a letter on expensive paper, topped with an eagle logo and the words, "Patriots for Justice." "Dear Mr. Mallory, your case represents everything wrong with today's America. We can provide top lawyers and $25,000 for your defense. All we need is your story on camera. How the system is persecuting you while coddling others." Frank's mouth went dry at the number. $25,000. Enough for a lawyer who might get him more time with Maddie. Enough to replace the space heater and buy her warm clothes for winter. Then Maddie's face flashed in his mind. Her eyes when she'd asked if he was really changing. The money felt dirty now, like poison wrapped in gold paper. With trembling fingers, he ripped the letter into tiny pieces. Across town, Alana sat in her home office, staring at her phone. The screen showed dozens of notification bubbles, angry messages calling her weak, threatening her family, demanding she stop babying criminals. She clicked the power button, making it all vanish. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened. "We can cancel everything, no one would blame you." "That's exactly what hate wants," Alana said quietly, "for us to shrink and hide." Evelyn, who'd been preparing dinner in the kitchen, came in wiping her hands on a towel. "What about something different? Not hiding, but not a circus either." She settled into a chair. "The church has good security. We could hold a service, prayers for peace, counselors on hand. Let people speak their hearts in a sacred space." Alana's shoulders relaxed slightly. A place for truth without shouting. Back at the transitional home, Frank found Agent Ruiz waiting in the common room. The agent's face was serious. As Frank handed over the torn pieces of the letter, "They included phone numbers and an email," Frank said. "I didn't call." Ruiz nodded, gathering the pieces into an evidence bag. "We'll investigate. This group has tried similar tactics before." He studied Frank. "You did the right thing reporting it." Later that evening, Frank sat with his counselor in a small office, practicing his statement for tomorrow's court appearance. The words felt like stones in his mouth. "I attacked an innocent woman because of hate and lies," he repeated. "I was wrong. I'm working to change." "Again," said the counselor. Louder this time. Close to midnight, Frank lay on his narrow bunk, whispering the words over and over, until they didn't taste like shame anymore. Just truth. His statement card rested on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. Miles away, in a warm bedroom, Alana sat propped against pillows, her hand resting on her rounded belly where the baby kicked steadily. The rhythm felt like hope, gentle but persistent, refusing to be still. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Frank adjusted his borrowed tie. Inside the Veterans Treatment Court, the wood-paneled room filled with the quiet shuffle of papers and whispered conversations, Frank's hands trembled as he gripped the podium, his prepared statement crumpling slightly at the edges. Judge Martinez looked up from her bench. "Mr. Mallory, you may proceed." Frank cleared his throat, his voice rough but clear. "Your Honor, what I did at the mall wasn't about protection or pride or any of the excuses I told myself. It was racism, plain and simple. I saw Dr. Brooks Warren's success and let jealousy turn ugly. I chose violence against a pregnant woman because I decided she didn't deserve what she had." He paused, steadying himself. "I accept the consequences. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just the chance to prove change is possible through treatment and honest work." From her seat near the bailiff, Alana dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Daniel sat beside her, one hand protectively on her shoulder. Two Secret Service agents flanked them, faces neutral but alert. The judge studied Frank for a long moment. "Mr. Mallory, your statement shows progress. The court recognizes your consistent attendance at counseling and your supervisor's positive reports from the charity. You will remain in the program with weekly reviews. Don't waste this opportunity." "No, ma'am," Frank said quietly. "I won't." Outside during the lunch break, Frank sat on a concrete bench, picking at a sandwich from the transitional home's kitchen. A familiar minivan pulled up, the foster care vehicle. His heart jumped as Maddie climbed out, wearing new sneakers and carrying her backpack. The caseworker, Ms. Chen, guided Maddie to the bench. "Remember, 15 minutes, she said gently. Maddie stood a few feet away, studying Frank's face. He stayed still, letting her decide. After what felt like forever, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a quick, careful hug. Frank's eyes burned. He wanted to hold on tight, to promise everything would be okay. Instead, he whispered, "I'm proud of you, kiddo," and let her step back when she was ready. "Your tie's crooked," Maddie said, almost smiling. "Never was good at these things," Frank admitted. They talked about her math test and the foster family's cat, until Ms. Chen signaled time was up. This time, Maddie's wave goodbye felt a little warmer. Across town that evening, Evelyn's church glowed with candlelight. Security teams had swept the building, and uniformed officers stood discreetly near the exits. Alana sat in a front pew, breathing in the familiar scent of wood polish and flowers as the congregation sang Amazing Grace. The piece lasted exactly 3 verses. Then Alana gasped, clutching her belly. A sharp contraction gripped her. Too early, too strong. "Mum," she whispered. Evelyn was already moving, signaling the agents. Daniel appeared at her side as if materialized there. "Breathe, honey," Evelyn said firmly. "Nice and slow." The next few minutes blurred into sirens and hospital corridors. Doctors rushed around her, calling out numbers and medical terms. Through it all, Alana kept one hand pressed to her stomach, praying, "Please, please, please." Her son arrived in a rush of pain and fear, tiny, silent, perfect. But he didn't cry. The nurses whisked him away to waiting specialists, while Daniel held Alana's hand so tight it hurt. "NICU," someone said. "Respiratory support needed." Back at the transitional home, Frank paced his small room after hearing the news from another resident. His mind raced with guilt and worry. Without thinking it through, he grabbed the small wooden mobile he'd been carving during craft therapy, delicate stars and moons meant for the charity's cribs. He scribbled a note, "Praying for your little one. I'm sorry for everything. Frank." The ankle monitor beeped its warning as he slipped past curfew, but he ignored it. The hospital chapel was just a few miles away. He could leave the mobile and note, then get back before anyone noticed. He made it as far as the hospital parking lot before the sheriff's cruiser's lights flashed. 2 deputies stepped out, hands on their belts. "Stop right there, Mr. Mallory." Frank slowly raised his hands, the mobile dangling from his fingers like broken dreams. As they cuffed him, he stared at the distant hospital doors, understanding with sick clarity how one impulsive choice could erase weeks of progress. The mobile fell to the asphalt with a soft clatter as they led him away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the small holding room as Frank sat with his head in his hands. His denim shirt was wrinkled from the deputy's firm grip when they'd caught him in the hospital parking lot. Just hours ago, he'd stood proud in court, finally feeling like he was becoming someone different. Now shame sat heavy in his stomach. Agent Ruiz entered, his dress shoes clicking against the concrete floor. He pulled out the metal chair across from Frank and sat down, placing a manila folder on the table between them. The ankle monitor sent an alert at 8:47 p.m., Ruiz said, his voice neutral but tired. You know what that means? Frank nodded, his throat tight. Emergency hearing in the morning. Why'd you do it, Frank? Ruiz leaned forward, elbows on his knees. After all the progress? I heard about the baby. Frank's voice cracked. I wanted to leave something at the chapel. A mobile I made from spare parts at the charity. And a note saying I was sorry. He met Ruiz's eyes. I wasn't running. I know that doesn't matter much now. The night crawled by in 10-minute checks and the squeak of deputy boots on linoleum. As dawn broke across town, Alana stood in the harsh light of the NICU, her hands pressed against the clear plastic of her son's incubator. The tiny oxygen tube looked too big against his face. Each beep of the monitor made her flinch, then relax when it showed his heart still beating strong. Daniel's hand rested warm on her shoulder, while Evelyn sat, nearby, her Bible open in her lap. The doctor had explained it gently. The early delivery meant the baby's lungs needed time to get stronger. Stay with me, little one, Alana whispered, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Mama's right here. She fought down the wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. At the courthouse by mid-morning, Frank stood before the judge in his wrinkled clothes, shadows under his eyes. The prosecutor's voice was sharp with frustration. Your Honor, the defendant has demonstrated he cannot follow even basic rules. This violation, if I may, Frank interrupted softly. The judge nodded. I panicked when I heard about the baby. I broke curfew. That's the truth, and I accept whatever punishment you give me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out torn pieces of paper. But there's something else you should know. He handed the fragments to Agent Ruiz, who passed them to the judge. This came yesterday, a hate group offering money if I'd go public against Dr. Brooks Warren. Agent Ruiz has been tracking their threats. The judge studied the papers, then Frank's face. The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. A screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life, showing Alana in what looked like a hospital conference room. Her face was tired, but composed. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear through the speakers. I believe accountability matters. So does rehabilitation. Mr. Mallory's actions last night were wrong, but they came from concern, not malice. Perhaps that's worth considering. The judge was quiet for a long moment, looking between Frank and the screen. Finally, he cleared his throat. Mr. Mallory, you'll be held until this evening. Then you'll return to the program under stricter conditions. Earlier curfew, daily check-ins, and additional counseling hours. His gavel cracked against the wood. This is your final warning. One more violation, no matter the reason, and your placement will be revoked. Do you understand? Frank's shoulders sagged with relief. Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Don't thank me, the judge said firmly. Thank the strength of your previous progress, and Dr. Brooks Warren's continued belief in rehabilitation. Don't waste this second chance. The deputies led Frank back toward the holding cells. Through the window, he could see the morning sun making the snow sparkle, a reminder of both beauty and boundaries, and the thin line he now walked between them. The morning sun streamed through the transitional home's windows as Frank sat at the edge of his narrow bed. His hands shook slightly as he reviewed the new schedule. Twice daily, check-ins, additional therapy sessions, and earlier curfew. The rules felt like a heavy weight, but also like guardrails, keeping him on the right path. Structure helps, his counselor had said during their morning session. When we're rebuilding trust, every small choice matters. At the charity warehouse, Marcus greeted him with a quiet nod. They worked side by side, sorting through bags of donated winter coats. Frank's movements were careful, deliberate. Each coat checked for tears, each zipper tested, each item folded with attention. My son was premature, Marcus said suddenly, smoothing a small blue jacket. Spent 2 months in the NICU, scariest time of my life. Frank's hand stilled on a pile of scarves. The vice president's baby, is he going to be okay? Word is he's getting stronger. Marcus met his eyes. Sometimes the smallest fighters surprise you. Across town, Alana sat in a rocking chair beside her son's incubator, one hand reaching through the port to touch his tiny fingers. The steady beep of monitors had become a familiar rhythm. Daniel dozed in a chair nearby, tie loosened, while Evelyn brought coffee and quiet prayers. "His oxygen levels are improving," the doctor said during morning rounds. "He's responding well to treatment." Alana's eyes filled with tears as she watched her baby's chest rise and fall. "That's my brave boy." 3 days later, Frank stood at the mall entrance, his heart pounding against his ribs. The security badge clipped to his plain grey shirt felt like a spotlight. He repeated the steps under his breath. Breathe, step back, ask for help. The community event filled the central courtyard. Tables with information about maternal health, volunteers in bright vests, and careful clusters of families. Secret Service agents blended with the crowd, alert but unobtrusive. Frank focused on his assigned tasks, directing people to restrooms, answering questions about coat donations, staying visible but calm. His ankle monitor felt heavy beneath his pant leg, a constant reminder. When Alana arrived with Daniel, the crowd shifted respectfully. She looked tired but composed in a simple blue dress, her voice steady as she spoke about dignity and second chances. Frank kept his distance, hands clearly visible, following every protocol. The shout came suddenly, angry words cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation. A man in a rumpled jacket pushed forward, moving aggressively toward a young mother who was trying to maneuver her stroller away from the commotion. Frank felt the old surge of adrenaline, the familiar tightening of his fists, but this time he took a deep breath and made a different choice. Moving deliberately, he positioned himself between the heckler and the frightened mother. He kept his hands open, his voice low and firm. "Back up. She's not your enemy." The man's face twisted. "You don't tell me." "Sir," Frank maintained eye contact while signaling security. "This is a peaceful event. Please step back." Guards approached smoothly, professional and calm. As they escorted the man away, Frank turned to the young mother. "Are you all right, Mum?" She nodded, clutching her baby's blanket. "Thank you." From across the courtyard, Frank glimpsed Maddie standing with her caseworker. His granddaughter's eyes were wide, watching him choose protection over anger. The pride in her small face felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When he dared to look up, he found Alana watching him too. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. She gave him a single, solemn nod. Not forgiveness, but recognition of a step taken, a choice made differently. Frank ducked his head and returned to his post, hands steady, heart full of quiet hope. In this same place where hate had fractured everything, maybe healing could begin to grow. The morning sunlight filtered through dusty blinds as Frank sat in his defender's office, a worn leather chair creaking beneath him. His counselor from Veterans Treatment Court joined them, spreading folders across the desk. Final sentencing was 3 days away. "The judge will want specifics," his defender said, tapping a pencil. "How you've changed, what you're doing differently." Frank nodded, his throat tight. "I keep a log now. Every shift at the charity, every meeting, every conversation with Maddie." The counselor smiled gently. "That's good. Structure matters. Tell me about yesterday's group session." "We talked about triggers," Frank said. "How anger feels in your body before it explodes. I used to think being tough meant never backing down. Now I know real strength is choosing not to hurt people." Over the next 3 days, Frank stuck to his routine like a lifeline. At the charity, he assembled cribs and sorted donations, speaking little but working steadily. Each evening he attended meetings where other veterans shared their struggles with anger and loss. At night, he wrote and rewrote his statement for court, trying to find words honest enough to match his actions. The morning of sentencing arrived cool and clear. Frank wore his cleanest shirt, pressed the night before. The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension as he waited on a hard bench, hands folded to hide their trembling. Inside the courtroom, Alana sat with Daniel and her mother, her face composed. The baby was still in the NICU, fighting to breathe on his own. Frank's chest ached at the thought. The judge entered, robes settling as she took her seat. Her voice carried clearly, "Mr. Mallory, your actions caused serious harm. You attacked a pregnant woman out of racial hatred. That truth cannot be erased." Frank stood straight, accepting each word. "However," the judge continued, "you've shown consistent effort in treatment. Your commitment to change appears genuine. This court believes in accountability and rehabilitation when earned." She outlined the terms: 2 years of intensive Veterans Treatment Court supervision, weekly therapy, anger management, and bias training. Full restitution to cover medical costs. Continued service work at the charity. Regular check-ins with probation. Regarding your granddaughter, the judge said, and Frank's heart stuttered. We'll implement reunification in phases. Supervised visits will extend gradually, contingent on your compliance. Weekend visits may begin after 3 months of stability. Tears pricked Frank's eyes, but he blinked them back. This was more than he deserved. Alana rose to speak, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. Justice requires consequences, she said, but healing requires hope. Mr. Mallory must face what he did. He must also have the chance to become better. 2 weeks later, Alana and Daniel brought their son home from the NICU. Frank learned about it during his evening meeting. That night he stayed late at the charity workshop, carefully sanding a small wooden train he'd made from scraps. He wrapped it simply and added a note: "For your son. May he grow strong and know only kindness." The weeks unfolded like careful stitches mending torn fabric. Frank met every requirement, attended every session, logged every hour. Maddie's visits stretched longer, first 2 hours, then 4, then full afternoons. She brought homework and they worked on math problems together. Sometimes she talked about foster care, and Frank listened without defending himself. 3 months passed. Frank's small room in the veterans' home gained touches of home. Maddie's drawings, a plant she helped him choose, books they read together. Her first weekend visit arrived with spring. They made pancakes, played board games, and Frank taught her to sand wood smooth. 6 months after sentencing, the church hosted a community potluck. Sunshine streamed through stained glass as people filled paper plates and found seats at long tables. Frank stood near the wall, still careful with space and boundaries. Maddie burst through the door with her caseworker, scanning the room. When she spotted Frank, her face lit up. She ran straight to him, wrapped her arms around his waist without hesitation. "Grandpa, I got an A on my science project." Frank hugged her back, gentle and sure, his heart full. Across the room, Alana sat with her healthy son in her lap, the baby's blue cap bright against her shoulder. Her eyes met Frank's. Her smile was small but real, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of the slow, steady work of becoming better. Frank held his granddaughter close, knowing that every step forward was a choice. Every day of staying better was a promise kept. Real redemption wasn't in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of choosing right over wrong, over and over again.